The sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain of the Arizona Territory as Eliza Lambert stared at the telegram in her trembling hands. Her brother was dead. The last family she had in this world was gone, leaving her alone in the merciless frontier town of Copper Springs. The year was 1878, and for a woman with no family and few prospects, the future looked as barren as the desert that surrounded the mining settlement. "Miss Lambert," the telegraph operator's voice barely registered. "Would you like to send a reply?" Eliza folded the telegram with shaking fingers, her mind racing. There was nothing to reply to. Her brother's mining partner had simply informed her of Thomas's death in a cave-in, offered condolences, and mentioned that her brother's meager possessions would be held for her collection. The brutal simplicity of frontier death. "No," she finally answered, tucking the paper into her pocket. "Thank you." The scorching afternoon air hit her like a furnace as she stepped onto the dusty street. Copper Springs had never felt like home in the 6 months she'd been there, working as a seamstress while her brother chased dreams of copper riches. Now it felt like a prison. Every face she passed seemed to stare. Every whisper felt directed at her predicament. She had, until the end of the month before, Mrs. Holcomb would expect rent on her tiny room above the seamstress shop. 2 weeks to figure out how a woman alone could survive in a place where even men struggled. Her feet carried her automatically to the general store, where she found herself staring at a weathered map tacked to the wall. Santa Fe was marked with bold letters. Her cousin Martha lived there, or had, 5 years ago, when they'd last exchanged letters. It was a desperate hope, but the only one she had. "Planning a journey, Miss Lambert?" The deep voice startled her. She turned to find Kieran Weston leaning against the counter, his lean frame relaxed but watchful. The cowboy worked for the Diamond B Ranch outside town, and she'd repaired his shirt just last week. His dark hair curled beneath his hat, and his eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, watched her with quiet intensity. "Just considering possibilities," she answered, turning back to the map. "My brother is dead." She hadn't meant to say it so bluntly, but the words tumbled out before she could stop them. Kieran straightened, removing his hat. "I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Lambert. Thomas was a good man." Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She barely knew Kieran Weston beyond his occasional visits to have clothing mended, but something in his sincere tone broke through her numbness, making the reality of her situation press in harder. "If you'll excuse me," she managed, moving toward the door. "Miss Lambert," he called after her. "If there's anything you need—" She paused but didn't turn. "Thank you, Mr. Weston, but I'm afraid there's nothing anyone can do." Back in her rented room, Eliza counted her savings 3 times, though the amount never changed. $27.43. Barely enough for a stagecoach ticket to Santa Fe, with nothing left for food or lodging along the way. She sat heavily on her narrow bed, eyeing the small trunk that contained her possessions. She could sell most of it. The dress she'd brought from Boston that was too fine for Copper Springs. Her mother's silver hand mirror. Maybe even her sewing supplies. Though that would leave her without a trade. A sharp knock interrupted her calculations. She opened the door to find Mrs. Holcomb, her landlady and employer, standing with lips pressed into a thin line. "I heard about your brother, Eliza." Such a shame. The older woman's sympathy seemed genuine, though it was quickly followed by practicality. "I suppose you'll be moving on now?" I'm considering my options." Mrs. Holcomb nodded. "You're welcome to stay the month you've paid for, of course, and I could use help finishing Mrs. Sanderson's wedding dress before you go." She hesitated. "There's also been talk of the mining company hiring a cook for their camp. It's not proper work for a lady, but—" "Thank you," Eliza interrupted. "I'll consider it." After Mrs. Holcomb left, Eliza sank back onto her bed. A cook at a mining camp, the same camp where her brother had died. Men who knew no boundaries with women who lacked protection. She'd heard enough stories to know what happened to camp women. Santa Fe was her only hope. If Martha still lived there, perhaps she could stay with her until finding work. If not, she couldn't bear to think beyond that. 2 days later, Eliza had sold everything she could spare and purchased a ticket on the eastbound stage. But as the departure date approached, a new worry surfaced. The stagecoach route to Santa Fe passed through 60 miles of Apache territory. The driver had assured her they hadn't had trouble in months, but his hand had drifted to his shotgun as he spoke. On her final night in Copper Springs, Eliza packed her remaining possessions and wrote a letter to Martha that she hoped would arrive before she did. As she sealed the envelope, another knock came at her door. "Mr. Weston," she said in surprise, finding the cowboy standing in the dim hallway. "Miss Lambert." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I heard you're taking the stage east tomorrow." "Yes, I have family in Santa Fe." The lie came easily now, after repeating it to everyone who asked. "The route's dangerous for a woman traveling alone." Eliza stiffened. "I have little choice, Mr. Weston." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "And there are always choices. I'm heading to Santa Fe myself next week with a cattle drive. You could travel with our group." She studied him, trying to determine his intentions. "Why would you offer that?" "Because it's safer," he said simply. "And because your brother once helped me when I needed it." This was news to her. "Thomas helped you?" Kieran nodded. "Last winter, I got caught in a storm up in the hills, took shelter in his camp. He shared his supplies, got me through the night. Good men are rare out here." Eliza felt tears threaten. It sounded like Thomas generous, despite having little himself. "Thank you for the offer," she said, "but I've already purchased my ticket. I leave at dawn." Kieran looked like he wanted to argue, but simply nodded. "Then at least take this." He held out a small revolver. "It's loaded. Just point and pull if you need it." Eliza hesitated before accepting the weapon. It was heavier than it looked, and terrifying in its implications. "I couldn't, please," he insisted, "for my peace of mind, if nothing else." Their fingers brushed as she took the gun, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Thank you." "Safe journey, Miss Lambert." He settled his hat back on his head and turned to go. "Eliza," she called after him, "if we're exchanging Christian names?" He smiled then, transforming his serious face. "Safe journey, Eliza." She slept poorly that night, the revolver under her pillow a constant reminder of the dangers ahead. When dawn broke, she dressed in her sturdiest clothes and gathered her small bag. Mrs. Holcomb was waiting downstairs, insisting on walking her to the stage office. The town was barely stirring as they made their way through the streets. At the stage office, the driver was loading baggage while 3 other passengers waited: 2 mining company men heading to Tucson and an elderly gentleman bound for Santa Fe. "All aboard, who's coming aboard?" the driver called. Eliza hugged Mrs. Holcomb goodbye and climbed into the coach. The elderly gentleman tipped his hat, introducing himself as Judge Patterson, while the miners barely acknowledged her. As the stage lurched into motion, Eliza caught a glimpse of a familiar figure on horseback at the edge of town, Kieran Weston, watching the stage depart. The first day of travel passed uneventfully, if uncomfortably. The roads were rough, the coach crowded, and the heat oppressive. They stopped at a way station for the night, where Eliza was given a small private room with a lock that didn't inspire confidence. The second day brought them into increasingly barren terrain. The miners departed at a crossroads, leaving just Eliza and the judge. Around midday, the driver pulled the coach to an abrupt halt. "Indians ahead," he announced grimly, reaching for his shotgun. Eliza's heart raced as she peered through the window. 3 mounted Apache warriors blocked the road ahead, their faces impassive under the blazing sun. "Stay inside," the judge advised, though he looked as frightened as she felt. The driver conferred with the warriors for several tense minutes before returning to the coach. "They say there's a war party ahead. We can't go this way." "What are our options?" the judge asked. "Turn back to the last station or take the south route. It's longer by 2 days and rough going." The judge frowned. "I have a court date to keep." "Then we turn back," the driver decided. "Sorry, folks." Eliza felt her careful plans crumbling. "How long until the route is safe again?" The driver shrugged. "Could be days, could be weeks. Apache don't keep to schedules." "Madam?" Back at the way station, little more than a fortified trading post, Eliza faced her dwindling options. She couldn't afford to wait indefinitely, but the southern route would cost more than she had left. That night, she overheard the station keeper talking with a passing rider about a wagon train forming at Eagle Pass, 20 miles south. They were heading for Santa Fe, along a route that avoided the worst of the Apache territory. By morning, Eliza had made her decision. She would try to reach the wagon train. The station keeper drew her a rough map, marking a trail that followed a creek bed much of the way. "Should be water all along," he assured her, "and it's mostly flat going." The judge thought she'd lost her mind. A woman alone crossing open country? It's suicide. "I'll hire a guide," she lied, but guides cost money she didn't have. When the judge and driver weren't looking, Eliza slipped away from the station, following the creek southeast. She'd calculated she could reach the wagon train in 2 days of walking if she kept a steady pace. The revolver Kieran had given her was tucked into her bag, a small comfort against the vastness of the desert. The first hours were easy enough. The creek provided water, and the morning was cool. By midday, however, the reality of her situation began to sink in. The sun beat down mercilessly, her water canteen was already half empty, and the distances were deceptively great. What had looked like a nearby hill on the horizon never seemed to get closer. She rested through the worst heat of the afternoon, then continued until dusk. Making camp alone in the wilderness was terrifying, but exhaustion eventually overcame fear. She slept fitfully, waking at every sound. The second day was worse. Her food was running low, her feet were blistered, and the creek had dwindled to a trickle. By afternoon, when she should have been nearing Eagle Pass, she realized she must have veered off course. Nothing around her matched the station keeper's description. Panic rose in her throat as the sun began to set. She was lost in the desert with perhaps a day's water left. The temperature was already dropping rapidly as darkness fell, and she had no proper shelter. She made a small fire more for comfort than warmth, and huddled beside it, trying not to cry. The distant howl of a coyote broke her resolve, and tears came in earnest. She thought of Thomas, of the life they had hoped to build in the West, of her parents long dead back east. She thought of Mrs. Holcomb, who would never know what happened to her, and of Kieran Weston, whose gun might be her final companion. Morning brought clarity, if not hope. She would follow the creek back the way she'd come. At least she knew there was a station in that direction, even if it took 3 days to reach it. But as she gathered her things, a realization struck her. She couldn't tell which way the creek flowed. She'd been so focused on following its course that she hadn't noted whether she was traveling upstream or down. Now, disoriented after a night in unfamiliar terrain, both directions looked equally possible. She chose based on instinct and began walking. By mid-morning, the creek had dried up completely, leaving only a dusty bed. The landmarks around her looked increasingly unfamiliar. She was well and truly lost. As the sun climbed higher, Eliza's steps became less certain. Her water was gone, and thirst clawed at her throat. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, scrubby vegetation, rocky outcroppings, and the distant mountains that never seemed to get closer. By afternoon, she was stumbling more than walking. Her thoughts turned hazy, and mirages shimmered on the horizon. Once, she thought she saw a rider in the distance. But when she called out, her voice emerged as barely a croak. The sun was setting when her legs finally gave out. She collapsed in the meager shade of a mesquite, too exhausted to go further. This, then, was how it would end. Another nameless grave in the vastness of the Arizona territory, if her remains were ever found at all. As consciousness began to slip away, the sound of hoofbeats penetrated her delirium. A hallucination, surely. But the hoofbeats grew louder, more insistent. With tremendous effort, she lifted her head. A rider was approaching at a gallop, silhouetted against the setting sun. As he drew closer, she recognized the broad shoulders and the way he sat his horse. Kieran Weston had somehow found her in this emptiness. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, rushing to kneel beside her. "Eliza! Thank God!" His hands were cool against her face as he cradled her head, holding his canteen to her parched lips. The water was warm, but felt like life itself flowing down her throat. "Slow," he cautioned as she gulped desperately. "Just a little at first." When she'd had enough to speak, she managed, "How did you find me?" "I followed the stage when I heard about the Apache trouble," he explained, wiping dust from her face with a bandana. "The station keeper told me your plan. Damn foolish plan, if you don't mind my saying." She didn't have the strength to be indignant. "I had to get to Santa Fe." So badly you'd risk dying in the desert? His voice was gentle despite the harsh words. I have nothing left in Copper Springs. The admission cost her. Kieran studied her face, something unreadable in his expression. You were heading the wrong way, he finally said. Eagle Pass is northwest of here. Eliza closed her eyes, defeated. Of course it is. Come on, he said, helping her to her feet. We need to find shelter for the night. There's a line shack about 2 miles from here. When her legs buckled, he lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her. She leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to care about propriety. His arms encircled her as he held the reins, solid and secure. The line shack turned out to be little more than a one-room shelter used by cowboys riding the boundaries of ranch land. But to Eliza, it was salvation. Kieran built a fire in the small stone fireplace while she sipped more water and ate strips of jerky from his saddlebag. As her strength slowly returned, so did her awareness of their situation alone, together in a remote cabin as night fell. It wasn't proper, it wasn't safe, yet she felt safer than she had in days. Thank you, she said, watching him prepare coffee in a battered pot. I would have died out there. He nodded without looking at her. Why were you so determined to reach Santa Fe? Eliza hesitated, then decided the truth couldn't make her situation worse. I don't actually have family there. I have nowhere and no one. I just thought I might find work in a larger town. Kieran handed her a tin cup of coffee. You could find work in plenty of places without crossing Apache territory alone. I was desperate, she admitted, and afraid. Of what? Of ending up like the other women with no family or husband in mining towns. She stared into her coffee. Cooking for miners until one decides to make me his whether I want it or not. Understanding dawned in his eyes. I see. I doubt you do, she said with sudden bitterness. You're a man. You can ride where you please, work where you want. Your body belongs to you alone. He was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I can't understand completely. But I know something about being alone in this country. His tone made her look up. There was a sadness in his face that matched her own. What brought you west, Kieran? He poked at the fire. The war, like a lot of men. You fought for the Union? It was a presumption, but his accent placed him from somewhere northern. Illinois Cavalry, he confirmed. Came home to find my family farm mortgaged beyond saving, and my father in an early grave. My mother had my sisters to look after, so I headed west to send back what money I could. Do you? She asked. Send money? A smile touched his lips. Every month for 8 years. My youngest sister had just got married on it. Eliza felt a pang of envy for his family ties. That's admirable. It's necessary, he shrugged. Family is all that matters in the end. The simplicity of his worldview was both refreshing and painful to her. Her family was gone. She was truly alone. Will you go back someday? He considered this. Maybe, when the ranch is more established. Mr. Barnett, he owns the Diamond Bee, he's getting older, talks about making me foreman someday. She could picture him in that role, respected, capable, fair. You'd be good at it. He looked surprised, then pleased by her assessment. What about you? Where's home? Nowhere now, she said softly. I was born in Boston, but after my parents died, I moved to Pennsylvania to live with my brother. When he caught gold fever and headed west, I followed because he was all I had left. Kieran studied her across the fire. And now I have $20 to my name and no destination that makes any more sense than another. He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. The cattle drive to Santa Fe leaves in 4 days. You could still join us. Safety in numbers. Eliza wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeking its warmth, though the night wasn't cold. Why are you helping me, Kieran? Truly? He met her eyes directly. Because I've watched you these past 6 months. You work hard. You're kind to people who don't deserve it. You mended my shirt when your own dress was fraying at the cuffs. He looked down. And because nobody should be alone in this country. Something in his simple honesty touched her deeply. Here was a man who saw her not as a potential conquest or a burden, but as a person worthy of respect. Thank you, she said again, unable to find better words. They slept on opposite sides of the shack's small space, Kieran insisting she take the narrow cot while he used his bedroll on the floor. Despite her exhaustion, Eliza lay awake for a long time, listening to his steady breathing and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Morning came with a decision. She would return to Copper Springs with Kieran, then join the cattle drive to Santa Fe. It wasn't ideal, but it was safer than her first attempt. They rode double again, Eliza sitting sideways in front of Kieran, acutely aware of his arm around her waist to keep her secure. The journey back took most of the day, and conversation flowed more easily than she would have expected. He told her about growing up in Illinois, about the ranch, about the country they passed through. She shared stories of Boston and her dreams of someday having a little dress shop of her own. It was nearly sunset when they crested the final ridge and saw Copper Springs in the valley below. Eliza felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Soon she would be back in her rented room, and this unexpected interlude with Kieran would end. "I can take you straight to Mrs. Holcomb's," he offered as they approached the town. Eliza nodded, though part of her wanted to prolong their time together. She must be worried. As they rode down the main street, people stared openly. A woman riding with a cowboy, her dress dusty and her hair wild. It was the kind of thing that started rumors in a town like Copper Springs. Eliza held her head high, reminding herself that she'd done nothing wrong. Mrs. Holcomb burst from the shop when they arrived, relief and disapproval warring on her face. "Eliza Lambert, we thought you were dead. The stage returned without you, and the driver said you'd vanished." "I'm sorry to have worried you," Eliza said as Kieran helped her dismount. "I made a foolish decision, but Mr. Weston found me before any real harm was done." Mrs. Holcomb's gaze shifted to Kieran, assessing him with narrowed eyes. "Well, that was fortunate indeed." Kieran touched his hat. "Madam, if you'll excuse me, I should see to my horse." "Will you come back?" Eliza asked before she could stop herself. Something flickered in his eyes. "If you'd like." "I would." After he rode away, Mrs. Holcomb ushered Eliza inside with a stream of questions and scolding that barely registered. All she could think about was a hot bath, a proper meal, and the possibility of seeing Kieran again. Later, clean and fed, she sat by her window, watching the street below. Copper Springs looked different somehow, less threatening, more familiar. Perhaps it was simply the contrast with the vastness of the desert, or perhaps it was knowing that at least one person in town had proven himself worthy of trust. A knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Holcomb with a troubled expression. "Mr. Weston is downstairs," she said. "It's not proper for him to call on you in your room, of course, but under the circumstances—" "I'll come down," Eliza assured her. Kieran was waiting in the small sitting room, hat in hand. He'd cleaned up and changed his clothes, though his face still showed the strain of their journey. "I wanted to make sure you were recovering," he said. "Much better, thank you." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit." He did, though he looked uncomfortable in the feminine surroundings. "I spoke with Mr. Barnett about the cattle drive. We leave Thursday morning. There will be 20 men, 3 chuck wagons, and about 500 head of cattle." "That sounds chaotic," he smiled. "It can be, but you'd travel in the chuck wagon, not on horseback. Cook's name is Pedro Decent Man, been with the outfit for years. You'd be safe. Thank you for arranging it." He twisted his hat in his hands. "There's something else." She waited, curious at his sudden nervousness. "I don't think you should go to Santa Fe." The statement caught her off guard. "Why not?" "Because there's no guarantee it'll be any better than here. Another town full of strangers, only without even the few connections you've made in Copper Springs." "What's my alternative? Stay here until my savings run out?" He took a deep breath. "Marry me." Eliza stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "Marry me," he repeated, more firmly this time. "I know it's sudden. We barely know each other, but I've respected you since the day you arrived in town, and these past 2 days have only confirmed what I already thought." "And what is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you're a woman of courage and dignity, that you deserve better than running from town to town, that we might build something good together." He looked down. "I have a small cabin on Diamond B land. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. The pay is steady, and Mr. Barnett is talking about making me a partner someday." Eliza's mind raced. Marriage? To a man she barely knew? It was madness. And yet, Kieran, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but marriage is a practical arrangement for many, he finished. I'm not declaring undying love, Eliza. I'm offering partnership, respect, protection. He met her eyes. And I believe affection would follow, in time. The straightforward proposal was unlike anything she'd imagined for herself, yet there was something refreshingly honest about it. No flowery promises, just simple truths. I need time to think, she finally said. He nodded, standing. Of course, I'll call again tomorrow, if I may. After he left, Eliza paced her small room for hours, weighing her options. Marriage to Kieran would provide security physical and financial. He was clearly a decent man. Handsome too, though she tried not to let that influence her thinking. But marriage was meant to be forever. Could she commit her life to someone she'd known for such a short time? By morning, she still hadn't decided. She went through her work mechanically, helping Mrs. Holcomb with alterations, while her mind circled endlessly around Kieran's proposal. Around midday, the bell above the shop door jangled. Eliza looked up to see Sheriff Davis enter, his expression grim. Miss Lambert, he said, removing his hat. I need to speak with you about your brother's death. A chill ran through her. What about it? New evidence has come to light. It appears the mine collapse wasn't an accident. Mrs. Holcomb gasped softly behind her. What are you saying? Eliza asked. Someone tampered with the support beams. Your brother and 2 other men were murdered. The room seemed to tilt around her. Why? Who would do such a thing? That's what we're trying to determine. Your brother and his partners had filed a claim on a new site just before the collapse. A valuable site, from what I understand. And now someone else has it, Eliza guessed, anger cutting through her shock. The sheriff nodded. The Copper King Mining Company filed on it 3 days after your brother died. The name meant nothing to her, but clearly it did to Mrs. Holcomb, who made a small sound of distress. What is it? Eliza asked her. The Copper King is owned by Jacob Preston, Mrs. Holcomb explained, the most powerful man in the territory. Are you saying he had my brother killed for a mining claim? Sheriff Davis held up his hands. I'm not accusing anyone specific, Miss Lambert, but I thought you should know we're investigating. After he left, Eliza sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information. Thomas hadn't died in an accident, he'd been murdered, and the murderer was still out there, probably counting on his grief-stricken sister to leave town as soon as possible. Maybe Mr. Weston's proposal isn't such a bad idea after all, Mrs. Holcomb said quietly. Eliza looked up in surprise. You heard? Small town. Mrs. Holcomb shrugged. And he asked my opinion before coming to you. Wanted to know if I thought you might be receptive. What did you tell him? That you were practical enough to recognize a good offer when you heard one. She patted Eliza's hand. He's a good man, Eliza. Those are rare enough in this world. When Kieran called that evening, Eliza was waiting in the sitting room. He entered looking nervous, but determined. Have you thought about my proposal? He asked without preamble. I have. She gestured for him to sit. The sheriff came to see me today. He believes Thomas was murdered. Kieran's expression darkened. I'd heard rumors. Something about a claim dispute? She nodded. Apparently, my brother and his partners found something valuable. Valuable enough to kill for. And now you're thinking of staying to see justice done. The thought crossed my mind. He leaned forward. Eliza, if Preston is behind this, and most folks think he is, he's not a man to cross. He owns judges, politicians, even some lawmen. So I should just leave? Let my brother's murderer go unpunished? No, Kieran said firmly. But pursuing this alone would be as dangerous as walking into the desert was. Understanding dawned. Not without you? He held her gaze. Not without me. In that moment, Eliza saw the choice before her clearly. She could run to Santa Fe and hope for the best. She could stay and seek justice alone, likely ending up dead herself. Or she could accept this man's offer, this partnership that promised both security and support in finding her brother's killers. Yes, she said. He blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. She smiled at his stunned expression. If the offer still stands, a slow smile spread across his face. It does. They were married 3 days later by the town's circuit preacher. Mrs. Holcomb insisted on making Eliza a new dress for the occasion, and several of Kieran's fellow ranch hands attended, along with Mr. Barnett himself, a gruff older man who gave them a small plot of land adjacent to Kieran's cabin as a wedding present. The cabin itself was simple but solid, situated on a rise overlooking a creek with cottonwoods providing shade. It had 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that caught the morning light. Kieran had clearly cleaned and prepared it for her arrival, adding touches like curtains and a patchwork quilt on the bed that he admitted sheepishly had been sent by his mother when he told her of his marriage. Life as a ranch wife was harder work than Eliza had anticipated, but also more satisfying than she'd expected. She learned to cook on the temperamental iron stove, to manage household supplies that had to last between infrequent trips to town, and to keep a garden in the challenging desert soil. Kieran was gone from dawn to dusk most days, working the cattle or mending fences or performing the countless tasks that kept the ranch running. But he always returned to her, bringing small gifts when he could, wildflowers, a book from Mr. Barnett's library, once even a kitten found in the barn to help with mice. Their marriage began, as he'd predicted, a practical arrangement based on mutual respect. They shared meals, conversation, and eventually the narrow bed, where Kieran proved as considerate a lover as he was a husband. Affection did indeed follow, growing quietly between them like Eliza's garden plants, fragile at first, then increasingly robust. But beneath their developing domesticity ran a current of purpose. Thomas's murder remained unsolved, though Sheriff Davis assured Eliza he was still investigating. Kieran, true to his word, helped her make discreet inquiries about Preston and the Copper King Mining Company. What they learned was troubling. Preston had a history of acquiring claims through questionable means. 3 other miners had died under suspicious circumstances over the past 2 years, all after filing promising claims that eventually ended up in Preston's hands. "He's careful," Kieran explained one night as they sat by the fire. "Never directly involved, always has intermediaries." "Then how do we connect him to Thomas's death?" Eliza asked, frustration evident in her voice. "We need someone on the inside, someone who knows his operation." Finding such a person proved difficult. Preston's employees were either loyal or terrified, and none would speak against him. Months passed, summer turned to fall, and Eliza found herself settling into her new life. The pain of Thomas's death didn't fade, but it became more bearable. Her relationship with Kieran deepened, transitioning almost imperceptibly from arrangement to genuine marriage. She realized one day that she looked forward to his return, not just for companionship or security, but because she had come to love him. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Love made her vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since Thomas died. If she lost Kieran now... "What's wrong?" he asked that night, noticing her quietness as they ate supper. "Nothing," she said automatically. He gave her a knowing look. "Eliza," she sighed, "I was thinking about how much has changed, about how much I stand to lose." Understanding crossed his face. He reached across the table to take her hand. "I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that, not while we're pursuing Preston." He squeezed her fingers. "Then perhaps it's time to let it go, to focus on the life we're building instead of the past." The suggestion startled her. "You want to give up? I want you to be happy, to feel safe." His eyes held hers. "I want our children to grow up without the shadow of revenge hanging over them." Children? They hadn't discussed a family explicitly, though it was always the implicit future of any marriage. He looked suddenly uncertain. "Do you not want children?" "I do," she assured him quickly. "I just hadn't thought..." She trailed off, then admitted the truth. "I've been so focused on justice for Thomas that I haven't allowed myself to think too far ahead." "Maybe it's time we did." He stood, circling the table to pull her to her feet. "Thomas wouldn't want you to sacrifice your happiness for his memory." She leaned into his embrace, letting his solid warmth comfort her. "Perhaps you're right." Their life took on a new sweetness after that conversation. Eliza began to look forward rather than back, allowing herself to imagine a future filled with children and growth. Kieran talked about building an addition to the cabin, about someday having a ranch of their own instead of working on Barnett's. Winter came, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rains that transformed the desert briefly into a place of surprising fertility. Eliza suspected she might be expecting their first child, though she hadn't confirmed it yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Kieran. Then, one January afternoon, everything changed. Eliza was in town buying supplies when she overheard a conversation between two miners in the general store. "Preston's bringing in new equipment for the Lambert claim," one said. "Must have hit a rich vein. Surprised he's developing it himself. Usually sells claims off quick after acquiring them. This one's different. Heard him tell Rollins it's the richest copper deposit in the territory." Eliza's heart pounded as she continued to eavesdrop, pretending to examine fabric bolts. "Shame about those fellows who found it," the first miner continued, "especially since Preston knew about the deposit all along, had a geological survey done months before they filed. That why he had Rollins arrange the accident. Keep your voice down, but yeah, that's the story. Rollins hired some drifters to tamper with the supports, then cleared out before the collapse." Eliza could barely breathe. Here was confirmation of what they'd suspected, and a name. Rollins. She'd heard it before. Spencer Rollins was Preston's foreman, a man with a reputation for handling problems for his employer. She finished her shopping with shaking hands and hurried back to the ranch to tell Kieran. He listened grimly to her account. "This is it," he said. "The connection we've been looking for. If Rollins hired the saboteurs, he can tie Preston to the murders. But how do we prove it? It's still just hearsay." Kieran paced the small cabin. "We need to get Rollins to talk. If we can get a confession, to a sheriff who might be in Preston's pocket, no, to witnesses no one can intimidate or bribe. His plan was dangerous." The next day, when Rollins was scheduled to inspect the mine site, Kieran would confront him, but not alone. Mr. Barnett, whose reputation for honesty was unimpeachable, would accompany him, along with two other ranchers known for their integrity. 4 witnesses to whatever Rollins might say. Eliza argued against it. "It's too dangerous. Rollins won't hesitate to kill again. He won't shoot 4 of the most respected men in the county in broad daylight," Kieran countered. "And this may be our only chance to get justice for Thomas." She knew he was right, but fear clutched at her heart. "Be careful, please." He cupped her face in his hands. "I will, for both of us." His hand drifted to her stomach, and she realized he'd guessed her secret. For all of us. The next morning, Eliza couldn't settle to her usual tasks. She paced the cabin, started chores only to abandon them, and jumped at every sound. When hoofbeats finally approached around midday, she rushed outside. It was Pedro, the ranch cook, his usually cheerful face grave. "Mrs. Weston, you need to come to town. There's been trouble." Her blood turned to ice. "Kieran, he's alive," Pedro assured her quickly, "but hurt, at the doctor's office." The ride to town was the longest of Eliza's life. Pedro wouldn't give her details, saying only that there had been a confrontation at the mine. Dr. Maxwell's office was crowded when they arrived. Sheriff Davis stood outside, looking troubled. Inside, she found Kieran on an examination table, his face pale but conscious. His left arm was bandaged, and blood had soaked through the wrappings. "Eliza," he breathed when he saw her. "I'm all right." She rushed to his side, taking his uninjured hand. "What happened?" Mr. Barnett stepped forward. "Rollins pulled a gun when Kieran confronted him. Got off 1 shot before we disarmed him." "Did he confess?" "Better than that," Kieran said weakly. "He's talking to save his own skin. Told the sheriff everything about Preston's scheme, named the men who tampered with the supports." Sheriff Davis entered, his expression grim but satisfied. "Preston's been arrested, so have 2 drifters Rollins identified as the saboteurs. It's over, Mrs. Weston." Relief and disbelief warred within her. "Just like that? After all this time?" "Justice moves slowly," the sheriff acknowledged, "but it does move." Later, when Kieran had been patched up, and they were alone in a private room at the doctor's office, Eliza finally let her emotions overtake her. Tears streamed down her face as she held his hand. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "Never?" He squeezed her fingers. "I promised, remember?" She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The joy that spread across his face was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Our baby. Thomas would be pleased," she said softly. "To know his death brought down a man who hurt so many, and to know his sister found happiness despite everything." She leaned down to kiss him gently. "I did, with a stubborn cowboy who wouldn't let me ride into the desert alone." He smiled against her lips. "Best decision I ever made, chasing after you." "Mine too," she whispered, "letting you catch me." Spring arrived with new beginnings. Preston and his accomplices were convicted after a trial that drew attention from newspapers as far away as Denver. Justice for Thomas didn't bring him back, but it allowed Eliza to focus fully on the future without the weight of unfinished business. Kieran's arm healed completely, though the scar remained a permanent reminder of what they'd risked for justice. Mr. Barnett, impressed by Kieran's courage and principles, made good on his promise to make him foreman with a substantial increase in pay. Their daughter, Margaret Thomas Weston, was born on a clear May morning, with Mrs. Holcomb serving as midwife. She had Kieran's blue eyes and Eliza's stubborn chin, and both parents were besotted from the first moment. "She's perfect," Kieran whispered, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that made Eliza's heart ache. "Just like her mother." As summer returned to the desert, Eliza sometimes thought about how close she'd come to a very different life. If she'd managed to reach Santa Fe, or if Kieran hadn't found her in the desert, or if she'd rejected his proposal, any of those paths might have led somewhere else entirely. But this path, this life with Kieran and their daughter on the ranch that was slowly becoming their own, as Barnett talked of retirement, this was where she belonged. The desert that had once seemed so hostile was now home, its harsh beauty a daily reminder of both fragility and strength. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, Maggie asleep in her cradle beside them, Kieran took her hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. Eliza considered the question seriously. "About marrying you? Never. About staying in Arizona instead of going back east where life would be easier?" She smiled, understanding the deeper question. The east wasn't home anymore, and easy isn't the same as fulfilling. She squeezed his hand. "This life we've built, it's more than I ever hoped for after Thomas died." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Mr. Barnett offered to sell me part of the ranch today. Said he's getting too old to manage it all." "Kieran, that's wonderful news. It would mean taking on debt, working even harder for a few years." "We'd manage," she leaned against him, "together." He kissed the top of her head. "That's what I told him." As darkness settled over the landscape, Eliza thought of how far they'd come from desperate strangers to partners in every sense. The path hadn't been easy or straightforward, but it had led them here to this moment of contentment under a star-filled sky. "I love you," she said simply. His arm tightened around her. "And I love you. From the moment I saw you stumbling through the desert, too stubborn to give up even when all hope seemed lost." She laughed softly. "Is that when it happened? Not very romantic." "On the contrary," his voice was warm with affection. "Your strength, your determination, even when it was misguided, that's what drew me to you. That's what I fell in love with. And here I thought it was my seamstress skills," he chuckled. "Those too." Maggie stirred in her cradle, and Eliza reached over to rock her gently back to sleep. This small family they had created, against all odds and the harshness of the frontier, it was nothing short of miraculous. 10 years later, the Diamond Bee had become the Weston Ranch. Kieran had gradually bought out Mr. Barnett, who now lived in a comfortable retirement in town, but still rode out occasionally to offer advice and play with the children, Maggie, now 10, and her brothers Thomas and James, 7 and 4. Eliza had opened a small dress shop in town, combining her seamstress skills with a talent for business that surprised even her. The venture allowed her to contribute to the ranch's finances during lean years, and gave her a sense of independence she valued. They had built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though Kieran had insisted on keeping the original cabin as a reminder of their beginnings. Sometimes Eliza would go there when she needed quiet, sitting on the porch where they had spent so many evenings in those early days. Life on the frontier remained challenging. Drought, illness, and the occasional conflict with rustlers or remaining Apache bands were constant threats. But they faced each challenge as they had from the beginning together, with determination and faith in each other. On the anniversary of the day Kieran had found her in the desert, they always took a special ride together. This year, with the children old enough to be left with Pedro's wife for the day, they packed a picnic and rode to the exact spot where he had discovered her all those years ago. "I still can't believe you found me," Eliza said as they spread a blanket beneath a mesquite tree. The odds must have been astronomical. Kieran smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "It wasn't purely chance. I knew the general direction you'd gone, and I followed the creek bed knowing you'd need water." "Still," she insisted, "it was a miracle. Perhaps—" He poured coffee from a thermos. "Or perhaps it was simply meant to be." Eliza leaned back, looking up at the vast blue sky. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd made it to the wagon train? If I'd reached Santa Fe?" "Sometimes." He stretched out beside her. "I imagine you'd have opened your dress shop there instead, become a respectable widow with a thriving business. And you? Oh, I'd have pined away for the mysterious seamstress who disappeared into the desert." He grinned. "Or more likely, I'd have followed you eventually." She raised an eyebrow. "Followed me? I told you back then nobody should be alone in this country." He took her hand, his calloused fingers familiar against hers. "Especially not someone I'd already half fallen in love with." "Half fallen in love? After barely knowing me?" "Some things you just know." He shrugged. "Like when I saw you standing in the general store that first day, staring at that map with such determination. I knew you were special." Warmth spread through her at his words, even after all these years. "I thought you were intimidating, so serious all the time." "I was serious about you." She laughed, the sound carrying across the desert. "When did you become such a romantic?" "Around the time a certain stubborn woman agreed to marry me, despite barely knowing me." He pulled her close. "Best gamble I ever took." "Mine too." She rested her head against his shoulder, content in a way she'd never imagined possible that desperate day when she'd set out alone into the wilderness. "Even if your proposal was the least romantic in history." He chuckled. "Marry me because it's practical, not exactly the stuff of novels." "I wouldn't change a word of it." She lifted her face to his. "It was honest, like you." They stayed until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, talking about the past decade and their hopes for the years ahead. As they packed up to return home, Eliza took one last look at the spot where she'd collapsed, where her life had nearly ended and, in another sense, had truly begun. "Ready to go home?" Kieran asked, already mounted and holding his hand out to help her up. Eliza smiled, taking his offered hand. "I've been home since the moment you found me." As they rode back toward the ranch, toward their children, and the life they'd built together, Eliza reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this point. A brother's death. A desperate plan. A cowboy who refused to let her face the wilderness alone. "Not without me," he had said that day. Words that had changed everything. Words that still define their partnership, their love, their life. Not without each other. Never again.